Good, that skill is not relevant here. I have everything I need. Now I'll write the story. It's almost 1 in the morning when I turned onto Fenwick Road. I want you to tell me in the comments where in the world you're listening from right now. Doesn't matter if it's midnight or noon where you are. I'd genuinely love to know. The porch light was off. I noticed that first. In 31 years of living on that road, I don't think the porch light had ever been off when I came home at night. Ruthie put that light on a timer the first winter we moved in because she said a dark porch was an unwelcoming thing and she wasn't going to have it. After she was gone, I kept the timer set the same way she'd always had it. Some habits you don't touch because touching them means admitting they belong to someone who isn't there anymore. But that night, the porch light was off. The rest of the house was dark too. Not sleeping dark. The other kind. The kind that settles in when a house has been left to itself for a while. I'd been on the road 4 days, up to a job site outside Knoxville and back, an electrical inspection contract that usually took a week, but had wrapped early because the lead contractor pulled 2 of his permits before I finished the 3rd floor walkthrough. Bureaucratic nonsense. I didn't mind. It meant I was coming home Thursday instead of Sunday. I sat in the driveway with the engine idling. One light was on in the whole house. The mudroom at the side of the building, the little room where we kept the washer and dryer, and the shelf of outdoor boots, and the cabinet of cleaning supplies. That light was on, and through the small window I could see movement. Steady, unhurried movement. Someone working. I checked the clock. 12:48 a.m. I turned off the engine. My name is Roy Callahan. I'm 62 years old. I spent 31 years as a licensed electrical inspector out of Clarksburg, West Virginia. And if there's one thing that career teaches you, it's that you look at what's actually in front of you, not what you expect to see, not what the permit says should be there. What's actually there. What was actually there was my 14-year-old grandson, Eli, alone in the mudroom at 1 in the morning doing something I couldn't quite make out through the glass. I got out of the truck. The front door was unlocked, which should have been the first thing I asked about. I walked straight to the mudroom. Eli was at the utility sink with his back to me, washing something by hand. I could hear the machine running too, a full load already going. He had the sleeves of his sweatshirt pushed up to his elbows, and he was scrubbing steadily, methodically, with the focus of someone who had learned to work without stopping. I said his name quietly so I wouldn't startle him. He spun around anyway. The thing I'll never get past is what happened in his face in that first half second. It wasn't surprise exactly. It was the rapid recalculation of someone who had been prepared for a different person to walk through that door and had to quickly adjust the entire situation in their head. Then relief came in. But the relief came in underneath something else. Underneath something I didn't have a name for yet but recognized, the way you recognize an electrical reading that's off by just enough to mean something is wrong in the wall. "Grandpa," he said. His voice came out carefully. "You weren't supposed to be back until Sunday. The job ended early." I looked past him at the sink. "What are you doing up?" He reached for a dish towel and dried his hands. "Just getting ahead on some things." "It's fine. It's 1 in the morning, Eli." "I know." He didn't meet my eyes. "You hungry? I can make you something." I looked at my grandson. Really looked. And I want to say here, to any parent or grandparent listening, that there is a particular failure of attention that happens when you love someone and you need things to be okay. You stop actually seeing them and start confirming the picture you want to see. I had been doing that for months without knowing it. Eli was thin, in a way that wasn't 14-year-old boy thin. His eyes had the steady, watchful quality of someone who had learned to read a room before committing to any particular expression. And there was something about the way he was standing, his shoulders slightly forward, his hands close to his body, that reminded me of the way animals stand when they've been hurt somewhere they're not showing you. "Where is everybody?" I said. His jaw tightened. "Mom took the kids to her sister's place in Pittsburgh a couple days ago." "Just the kids?" He picked up the dish towel again and folded it. "Her and the kids." I looked at him for a long moment. "And Danny?" Eli set the dish towel down on the edge of the sink. "He's around." I walked to the kitchen and turned on the light. The sink had dishes in it. Not a meal's worth. More than that. The kind of accumulation that builds up when one person has been responsible for a household on their own. I opened the refrigerator. 3 containers with paper-taped labels in handwriting I didn't recognize. a half-empty gallon of milk, 2 eggs. The freezer had a bag of store-brand chicken and a box of frozen waffles. Eli had appeared in the kitchen doorway. "When did you last eat a real dinner?" I said. He shrugged with one shoulder. "Today." "What did you have?" He looked at the ceiling. "Cereal. And a sandwich before that." I pulled out a chair at the kitchen table. "Come sit down." He crossed the kitchen slowly and sat. He sat like someone who wasn't sure he was allowed to stop moving yet. "How long has your grandmother been in Pittsburgh?" 4 days. I did the math quietly. That was the day I left for Knoxville. "And Danny's been here?" Eli was quiet for a moment. "He's here nights, mostly." "Mostly." He pulled at a loose thread on his sleeve. "He's around." I knew what around meant. I'd known what around meant since the February, that Danny Schraft moved into this house and into my daughter Pam's life and settled in the way certain people settle, not like someone making a home, but like someone determining how much of a space they could reasonably occupy before anyone said anything. "Has he been leaving you food money?" Eli looked at the table. He said I could make stuff from what's here. I thought about the 2 eggs and the bag of frozen chicken and the box of waffles. "Has Danny been leaving you here alone?" The thread on his sleeve pulled free. Eli looked at it in his hand. "He comes back at night. Most nights." "Most nights." "He hasn't yelled at you?" I kept my voice flat and even. "He hasn't put his hands on you?" Eli shook his head. "No. He paused. "He doesn't really notice me." I sat with that for a moment. Then I got up and made us both eggs and toast. I didn't say anything while I cooked. There are moments when a man needs to stand at a stove with his back to the room so his face can do what it needs to do. When I set the plate in front of him, he looked at it the way children look at food when they haven't been fed properly. Not greedily, but with a specific careful relief, like they're afraid the thing might be taken back. "Talk to me," I said. "The real version. Not the one where everything's fine." He ate a bite first. Then he started talking. "To understand what Eli told me at that kitchen table, you need to know who he is, and who I am, and how he came to be living under my roof in the first place. I'll take you back. I grew up in Clarksburg, raised by my mother alone, in a house that my mother's mother had built with money she saved cleaning other people's homes. 3 generations of women holding the same walls up. When I was 17, I climbed a telephone pole on a dare and discovered that being 60 feet off the ground didn't bother me the way it bothered most people, and that wiring made sense to me in a way that geometry class never had. I got my apprenticeship papers at 19. By 24, I had my inspector's license. I was 27 when I met Ruth Ellen Birchfield at a county planning meeting, of all places. She'd come to argue against a variance for a strip mall that was going to put 3 family-owned stores out of business. She stood up at the public comment period with a legal pad full of notes and delivered the most organized, clear-headed argument I'd ever heard from a person who wasn't being paid to make arguments. She lost the vote, but she got 3 of the council members to agree to a 2-month review period, which she then used to organize a local business coalition that eventually negotiated the developer down to a smaller footprint. I asked her name from the woman next to me at the back of the room. I went home and thought about nothing else for 3 days. Our first date was coffee at a diner on Main Street. She ordered coffee and a piece of cherry pie, and when the server brought it, she immediately pushed the plate to the center of the table and handed me a fork. "For sharing," she said. That was Ruth. She thought everything good should be shared. Food, stories, the funny thing you noticed out the window, the diner she liked, the life she was building. I married her in 1989 in her mother's backyard with 40 people and a borrowed guitar, and a cake that leaned noticeably to the left because her sister had made it, and her sister was a better cook than baker. Our daughter Pam was born in 1991, our son Marcus in 1993, and we built the kind of life on Fenwick Road that I still believe is the only real definition of wealth. Not money, not things, but the specific gravity of a house that people want to come back to. Ruth ran the town's literacy program for 22 years. She baked bread every Saturday morning, the same bread, the same bowl, the same hands that knew exactly when the dough was right. She sang in the church choir. She remembered every birthday in a 30-person extended family without writing any of them down. When Pam was 26, she had Eli. The father didn't stay. Pam tried raising him alone for a year and then called us, which was the right thing to do and also cost her something to admit. Ruth and I said, "Come home." They came home. And for 6 years, that house on Fenwick Road was 4 people. Me, Ruth, Pam, and Eli. Those were good years. I want to say that plainly. They were genuinely good years. Then 2019 came. Ruth started having headaches in March. By June, the headaches had a name, and the name was not anything we were prepared for. By September, we understood that the naming was not the hardest part. The hardest part was everything after. I won't dwell on the medical details because they belong to Ruth, and I'm careful about that. What I'll say is this. She fought with everything she had, and everything she had was considerable, and it still wasn't enough. And on a Tuesday evening in April of 2021, Ruth Ellen Callahan died at home in the bedroom she'd shared with me for 32 years, with my hand in her hand, and Pam on the other side of the bed, and Eli sitting in the hall outside the door, because he'd asked if he could be close, but didn't feel ready to be inside. He was 11 years old. He sat in that hallway for 2 hours without moving, and without making a sound. And when Pam finally opened the door and found him there, he looked up at her and said, "Is she peaceful now?" I've never been a man who cries easily. I cried when I heard that. The year after Ruth died was the hardest year I've known, not because of any one thing, but because of the accumulated weight of all the small things that a person handles when the person who handled half of everything is no longer there. You don't know how much someone has been doing until the doing stops. Pam held the house together. She was at the kitchen table every morning when I came downstairs. She kept the grocery list. She drove Eli to school. She called her brother Marcus once a week and gave him honest reports of how I was doing rather than the easier version I would have given him myself. I don't know what I would have done that year without my daughter, which is exactly why I didn't see it coming when she met Danny Schraft. He came through a mutual friend in the summer of 2022, 40 years old, divorced, worked in equipment leasing, which is a business that exists in a space just vague enough that people rarely ask follow-up questions about it. He had good manners when he needed them, and a talent for making himself comfortable in other people's spaces so gradually that by the time you noticed how much room he was taking up, moving him out would have required an explanation. The first time he came to the house for dinner, he complimented the roast chicken and told me about a job he'd once done near Clarksburg and asked Eli 3 questions about school and remembered the answers when he came back the following week. I thought he was a decent man. I missed Ruth badly enough to make that mistake. By fall of 2022, Danny was at the house 3 or 4 nights a week. By winter, he had a drawer in Pam's room. By spring of 2023, he had moved in. Just temporarily, while his apartment situation sorts itself out. He was still there 2 years later. I need to be honest about something. The trouble between Danny and Eli didn't announce itself. It never does, in my experience. What happens is a series of very small things, each one easy to explain, that add up to something that only becomes visible when you take the whole picture in at once. By the time you're seeing the whole picture, you've already been in the middle of it for a long time. Danny wasn't violent. I want to be precise about that, because precision matters here. He never raised his hand to Eli. What he did was different, and in some ways harder to name. He ignored Eli with intention. That's the only way I've found to describe it accurately. It wasn't the absent-minded inattention of a man preoccupied with his own life. It was a deliberate withholding, a pointed looking past. He spoke to Pam about things Eli had done, as if Eli were not present in the same room. He took the last of something from the refrigerator without thinking to check if Eli had eaten. When the household chores got divided up, Eli's list grew longer every month, while Danny's explanations for why he personally couldn't do a particular thing grew more elaborate. Pam had 2 younger children from a previous relationship, Tyler and Ava, 8 and 6. They were with their father every other week. On the weeks they were home, the house ran the way Danny wanted it to run. Eli cooked for 6, cleaned up after 6, took out the trash, handled the lawn, and ate whatever was left. On the weeks Tyler and Ava were away, Pam and Danny took trips. Short ones mostly. A long weekend here, a few days there. And Eli stayed home, 14 years old. Home alone for 4 days, 5 days, living off whatever was in the refrigerator, with Danny dropping back in at night when he remembered to. And every time I came home from a job and asked Pam how things were going, she said fine. And I believed her because she was my daughter and because I needed her to be okay, and because I had been making the same mistake with Pam that I made with everyone I loved after Ruth died, which was accepting the answer I needed instead of looking at the evidence in front of me. At the kitchen table, Eli told me about the first night he was left alone. He was matter-of-fact about it. That was the detail that stayed with me. He described it the way you describe something that has become normal, something you've absorbed so thoroughly it doesn't register as remarkable anymore. Mom said she'd leave money on the counter, he said. There was $40. She was gone 5 days. He ate from that $40 and from what he could find in the back of the cabinets and didn't tell anyone because he didn't think anyone would think it was a problem. I didn't call you, he said. He looked at his plate. You would have worried. I would have worried, I said. That's my job. That's literally what I'm here for. He was quiet for a moment. I thought you had enough to worry about. I want you to sit with that for a second, if you're willing. A 14-year-old boy rationing $40 over 5 days, alone in a house, choosing not to call his grandfather because he was concerned about burdening him. That's not the calculus of a child who has been allowed to be a child. There's more, he said. Tell me. He looked at the table. I haven't been to school since Thursday. I set down my fork. Since Thursday. That's 4 days. I thought I had to wait for someone to drive me. His voice had gone very quiet. And nobody said anything about it, so he shrugged with one shoulder, stayed home. A boy who had been sitting in a house alone for 4 days, missing school, not because anyone told him not to go, but because no one had arranged for him to get there, and he didn't know if he was supposed to sort that out himself, and he was afraid of doing the wrong thing, so he did nothing. The particular helplessness of a child waiting for someone to organize their life. I pushed my chair back from the table. Go get ready for bed, I told him. I'm going to call the school first thing in the morning and sort out the absences, and then you and I are going to talk about some things changing. He stood up and carried his plate to the sink and rinsed it. Automatic. Habitual. The action of someone who has learned that dishes left in a sink have consequences. Grandpa, he said, not turning around. Yeah. Is it okay that you're home? I said yes. It's more than okay. He nodded once, like a person checking a box, and went upstairs. I stayed at the kitchen table until 2 in the morning. Then I made myself go to bed because I knew I needed to be functional the next day. I lay on my back on my side of the bed, with the room quiet around me, and I thought about all the things I had been looking at without seeing. I thought about the gradual way Eli had stopped mentioning school. I thought about the phone calls home, where Pam said everything's fine and I said I'm glad to hear it and moved on. I thought about Christmas, 6 months back, when Eli had sat at the far end of the table and barely spoken, and I'd told myself he was at the age where teenagers went quiet, which is true, and used it to avoid asking the question underneath, which was whether this particular quiet meant something specific. I thought about the 4 months after Ruth died when Eli had been so careful with me, bringing me coffee without being asked, sitting near me without requiring me to perform being okay. At 11 years old, he had understood something about grief that most adults take years to figure out, and I had repaid that by not looking at him hard enough for the past year and a half. I want to be clear about who is responsible for what Danny Schraff did. Danny is responsible for Danny. Pam made choices I am still working through my feelings about, but I was the adult in that child's corner, and I had been looking in the wrong direction. You cannot fix what happened while you were looking away, but you can determine what you do the moment you turn back around. I got up at 5:30. I made coffee, made oatmeal, set 2 places at the kitchen table. When Eli came downstairs at 6:40 in his school clothes, he stopped at the bottom of the stairs when he saw the table set. You're driving me? I'm driving you, I said. And every morning after this, until we get something else figured out. He sat down and ate. He ate the whole bowl. I won't describe everything that happened in the following 2 weeks in real-time detail because the legal parts move slowly and the important things are the ones that happen between the procedural moments. But I'll tell you what I found and what I did with it. First, I called Danny. I didn't call him angry. I called him precise. I told him that I was home, that I had had a long conversation with Eli, and that I needed him to come to the house that evening so we could discuss how the household had been running in my absence. He said sure, no problem, completely accommodating, the voice of a man who has managed difficult conversations by declining to treat them as difficult. He came at 7. He sat at the kitchen table with his hands folded and a mild, open expression. The expression of a man who is accustomed to finding a way to make other people feel like the unreasonable one. I put a single piece of paper on the table between us. I had written down everything Eli told me, every date, every specific, what he ate, when he'd last been to school, how much money had been left, and for how long. When Danny had and had not been home, I had asked Eli to read it before I printed it, and he had added 2 things, and corrected 1 date and signed the bottom of the last page in his careful 14-year-old handwriting. Danny looked at the paper. Then he looked at me. He said, "Roy, I understand how this looks." I said, "It looks exactly like what it is." He said, "Kids that age exaggerate." He said it the way you say something when you've said it before, smoothed down by repetition. He said, "Eli's always been dramatic. I've known Eli Callahan his entire life," I said. "I have never once seen that boy exaggerate. About anything." Danny looked at the paper again. He was recalculating. I could see it happening. I said, "I'm not asking you to explain. I'm telling you that you're going to be out of this house by Saturday morning. I've called my daughter and told her the same thing. She's coming home tomorrow, and I'll speak to her then. But you need to be gone before she gets here." He said, "This is Pam's house." "I own the house," I said. "I've owned it since 1991. Pam lives here." "That's a different thing." He tried 2 more approaches after that. "I'm not going to describe them because they don't deserve the space. I'll say only that I had been a licensed inspector for 31 years, and I knew the difference between a man who had made a mistake and genuinely didn't understand it yet, and a man who understood exactly what he'd done and was simply working out whether he could still negotiate around it. Danny Schraft was the second kind. He was out by Thursday. He didn't wait for Saturday. Pam came home on a Friday. That conversation was the hardest one I've had since Ruth. Harder in some ways because with Ruth I was losing someone to something neither of us controlled. And with Pam I was watching my daughter look at choices she had made and understand them for what they were. That is a different kind of grief. Slower and more particular. She cried for a long time. I let her. She said, "I didn't see it." I said, "I didn't either, for too long." She said, "Eli never said anything to me." "I know," I said. "He didn't want to worry you. He told me that." Pam pressed both hands flat on the table and looked at them. "He's protecting me," she said. "Still." "Yeah," I said. "He is." She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "What do I do?" I said, "You talk to him, not to explain, just to listen." She went upstairs. She knocked on his door. I heard her knock, and I heard the door open, and I heard the muffled particular sound of 2 people saying the true things to each other, and then I heard nothing else for a long time because I had gone out to the back porch and was letting them have what they needed without me in it. The back porch faces the old ash tree that Ruth planted the year we moved in. It's a big tree now, 30-some years of growing in one spot. Ruth used to say you could judge a place by whether the things planted in it had room to grow. I sat out there until the kitchen light came on, and I heard Eli come downstairs, and I heard the refrigerator open, and the particular sound of Pam making grilled cheese, which was the thing she'd always made Eli when he was small and couldn't sleep. I stayed on the porch another 20 minutes after that. Then I went inside. They were at the table. Pam had her hand over Eli's, and Eli was eating his grilled cheese with the specific, focused attention of someone giving himself permission to just eat the thing in front of him without thinking about tomorrow yet. I said, "Any left?" Pam stood up and got the pan and made me one without being asked. We ate together at the kitchen table at 10:30 at night, and the 3 of us didn't say anything important for the rest of the evening. We just ate the food and existed in the same room and let the house be quiet around us the way a house should be quiet. Not empty quiet, but the kind of quiet that means everyone is accounted for. The legal piece took time. It always does. I made calls on Monday morning. My grandson's school first, to address the absences and make sure there were no disciplinary consequences on his record that he didn't deserve. They were decent about it. His homeroom teacher said, "We noticed he'd been struggling and tried to reach home twice." I asked her who she'd called. She gave me the number. It was Danny's cell phone. Danny had been listed as the primary household contact. I corrected that on the spot. Then I called a family attorney named Carol Whitfield that Marcus had used for a property matter 2 years back and who he'd described as thorough. She turned out to be exactly that. I described the situation. She listened without interrupting. When I was done, she said, "How old is the boy?" 14. "And you have documented records of the dates he was left alone?" "I have everything written down with Eli's signature on it." She was quiet for a moment. She said, "We should also look at whether any household financial resources were directed away from his care." I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "In situations like this, there's sometimes a pattern where funds designated for household expenses don't reach the people those expenses are supposed to cover." I went home and looked at the household account Pam and I shared, the joint account I'd set up so she could cover house expenses while I was on the road. I'm not going to tell you the number except to say it was enough to make my vision go narrow for about 30 seconds. Regular withdrawals, not dramatic ones, the kind that don't immediately look like anything. Carol Whitfield said she needed 2 days to review what I sent her. She called back in one. She said, "Roy, whoever was managing this was careful. But careful and invisible are different things." She said, "I want to bring in a forensic accountant for the bank records." I said, "Do what you need to do." The school situation resolved cleanly. The absences were marked excused. His teachers sent home 2 weeks of work in a packet, and Eli sat at the kitchen table and worked through it methodically, one subject at a time, without complaining. On the second evening, I sat down across from him with my own coffee while he finished a history worksheet. He looked up. I said, "I owe you something." He waited. I said, "I should have been paying closer attention for a while now, and I wasn't, and I'm sorry for that." He looked at me for a moment. "You didn't know. I should have made it my business to know. A man who inspects wiring for a living ought to be able to identify when something in his own house is running wrong." Eli was quiet. Then he said, "You were having a hard time. I know I was. That's not an excuse." He looked back down at his worksheet. Then he said, "Grandma would have known." "Yeah," I said. "She would have known the first week." He smiled at that. A small one. She was good at catching things. She was the best I've ever seen. He picked up his pencil and went back to the worksheet. After a minute, he said, still looking down, "I'm glad you came home early." I stayed at the table with him while he finished. The thing about the notes came out 2 weeks later. I was reorganizing the kitchen cabinet, the one above the refrigerator that accumulates things that don't belong anywhere else, when I found a shoebox pushed to the back, behind a stack of placemats. The box had Ruth's handwriting on the outside, just 2 letters, E.C. Eli Callahan. I took it down and opened it. Inside were small slips of paper, the size of grocery receipts, folded once, maybe 60 of them. Ruth's handwriting, the careful cursive she'd used for everything important. I opened the first one. "You made me laugh out loud today. Don't ever stop doing that, E." I opened a second one. "Being brave doesn't mean you weren't scared. It means you went anyway. I know you went anyway. I was watching. I'm always so proud." I stood at the kitchen counter with the box in my hands, and my whole chest closed down to about the size of a fist. She'd written them while she was sick. I hadn't known about them. She hadn't told me. She'd made them for Eli, and put them somewhere she trusted would eventually be found. I carried the box upstairs and knocked on Eli's door. He was at his desk. I set the box in front of him. "I found these in the kitchen." He looked at the box. Then he looked at me. His expression shifted through something I didn't have a name for, and then settled into a stillness that I recognized as the face he made when something was too important to respond to quickly. "Are those from her?" he asked. I said yes. He put both hands on the box, but didn't open it. He said, "I didn't know these existed." I didn't either. He sat there with his hands on the box. He didn't open it while I was in the room. I think he needed to open it alone. I said, "They're yours. She made them for you." He nodded. His jaw was working. I closed the door behind me and went downstairs and sat on the back porch for a while. The ash tree was catching the last of the day's light. The neighborhood was quiet. A dog somewhere down the street. I thought about Ruth at the kitchen table late at night, writing notes on slips of paper in a box she labeled with her grandson's initials, building a supply of her love to leave behind for him the way you leave a pantry stocked before a long trip. She always knew what she was doing, more than I've ever given her credit for even now. The legal matter found its conclusion in the spring. Carol Whitfield was methodical about it, and I won't detail every step, because most of it is not mine to detail. What I'll say is that the forensic accountant confirmed a pattern of financial irregularities, that the appropriate parties were notified, and that the appropriate consequences followed. I'm at an age where I've learned that justice doesn't always look the way you expect it to, and doesn't always arrive when you need it to, but it is more reliable than people who've been hurt tend to believe. Pam has been doing the work. That's the truest way I know to say it. She found a counselor in the spring, not because I told her to, because she decided on her own that she needed to understand how she'd gotten to the place she'd gotten to. I think it's the bravest thing she's done. I've told her so. She and Eli have dinners together on Thursday nights, just the two of them. She cooks. He picks the movie afterward. It's a small thing, and it is not a small thing at all. Marcus drove up from Morgantown in April for a long weekend and spent most of Saturday helping me rewire the garage, which had needed doing for 2 years. He and Eli spent Sunday afternoon at the table with a chessboard between them, a game that took so long I fell asleep in the armchair and woke up to find them still at it. That night, after Marcus headed home, Eli came out to the porch where I was having my last coffee. He sat down in the other chair, the one that had been Ruth's. "Dad brought you guys together," he said. "Uncle Marcus, the chess. He makes it easy to get to know him." Eli said yeah. He said it quietly, the way he said things that mattered. Then he said, "I've been reading the notes, one a day. How many have you gotten through?" He thought about it. 23. I said, "How many are left?" He said, "Enough." That word, spoken by a 14-year-old boy on a fall evening in West Virginia, hit me somewhere. I don't have a precise anatomical term for enough. She'd written enough. I looked at the ash tree in the yard, the October light in the leaves, the very particular gold that only happens at dusk in the fall, and only if you're sitting still enough to catch it. We stayed on the porch until it was fully dark. Neither of us felt the need to fill the quiet. The following Tuesday, I drove Eli to school the way I had every morning since I came home. He got out at the curb, pulled his backpack up onto his shoulder, and then turned back before he closed the door. "Hey," he said. "Hey, what?" He gave me the small smile, the one that was his own and nobody else's. "Thanks for coming home early," I said. "Best mistake the man ever made, pulling those permits." He laughed. A real one. And then he turned and walked toward the school entrance, and I sat in the truck and watched him go, and I didn't pull away until the door had closed behind him. There's something I want to say before I go. I've been in electrical inspection for 31 years. The single most dangerous thing I encounter on a job site is not bad wiring. It's good wiring that's been covered over. The problem that looks fine on the surface because someone took the time to make it look fine. Those are the ones that burn houses down at 2 in the morning. The children in our lives will sometimes make things look fine because they love us and they don't want to add to what we're already carrying. They will fold the dish towels. They will say they're okay. They will ration $40 over 5 days and not call us so we won't worry. They are doing all of that for us. The least we can do is come home early enough and look hard enough and listen without flinching at what we find. If something in this story is sitting with you today, leave me a comment. Tell me where you're listening from. Tell me what it brought up. Your words have a way of finding the person who needs to read them. And if this reached you today, share it with someone it might reach next. That's how these stories travel. And that's exactly where they're supposed to go.